She's not had anything like this at all. And then to have this, at this stage of life, she'll have a little bit different outlook on the world and the way things happen and the way things go. And in that whole process, I hope that, she'll just count her blessings, because there's some 15-year-olds that have had way more things happen to them in their life than what she has. And so she's doing well, and I thank you all for that. Do what? Yeah, we were asking about that, because TSA, if she ever wants to fly in an airplane and all of that. So she's got to get a medical bracelet. And so then when she goes through and that thing goes nuts, she'll be able to just hold it up and say, I got a medical thing. And so that's going to be something, because she's never had that before, and I can assure you the first time it happens, she'll freak. But once again, life experience, right? So anyway, thank you for your prayers. Let's go to God in prayer this morning, and then we'll turn our attention to the book of Daniel. Dear God and loving Father in heaven, we thank you for the good day. Father, we are thankful for your many blessings and thankful for the answering of prayers that have been offered up on behalf of folks, especially Kinsley this morning, as she is doing well, and we are grateful and thankful for that. We ask you to continue to be with her as she recovers from this procedure, and we pray that it'll be enhancing to her life and will be a benefit in the years to come. And we thank you, dear God, for everything that is ours through your Son, Jesus. And Father, it's in his name we pray. Amen. So I don't know anything about this, but this is one of the things that's puzzled me, is these bars stay in for 3 years. And then they go in, and apparently it's the way the doctor talked, listening to the surgeon. They go in and they make a small incision on the side, and they just grab them and boop, pull them out. I'm like, what's going to be attached to those things? I mean, I don't have any idea. They may be made out of a material that the body doesn't adhere to it, but the way he talked, it's a very simple procedure. Go in, make an incision over here, and they just pull them out, and that's it. I hope it's that easy, but I was sitting here just thinking to myself, this sounds too good to be true to me. I mean, I don't know how things wouldn't adhere to those bars and everything else, but I hope it's just that easy 3 years from now. All right, so let's look at chapter 5. Belshazzar. He's going to have a feast. Now, Belshazzar is going to be the last king of the Babylonian Empire, and he's going to have a feast. Verse 1 through 9 is going to be the feast and the vision that is going to be seen. So Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Now when Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So you have this big party that's taking place, and as Nebuchadnezzar had tasted the wine, or Belshazzar, he had tasted the wine. So what does that indicate? And then the actions in this second verse. Tasted the wine. What, Ben? Okay, that could be one way of looking at it, and I think more probably the point is, after he had tasted the wine and had gotten what? Drunk, intoxicated. It was then that he said what? Go get the vessels and take them out of the temple to Nebuchadnezzar's God. Nebuchadnezzar had seized these items from the temple of the house of God, and now he brought them and he put them in the house of his God. Now apparently they were just there on what? Display. And as people would come in and they would be there and he would see all of this, it would be a testament to the ability of Nebuchadnezzar and his conquering of the Jewish people. So now when Belshazzar tasted the wine, then he gave orders to bring the gold and the silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, because he wanted everyone that was there that night, which numbered somewhere around what? 1,000. And this is 1,000 of his nobles. And then it says, then they also had the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, so they are there. And he says, now bring them that they might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God which was in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Now notice the order. When you notice the order of these particular vessels, they were of gold, they were of silver, they were of bronze, and they were of iron. This is the same order we see in this instance, minus the wood and the stone, in Daniel chapter 2, where the kingdoms are being outlined for us. Nebuchadnezzar, you're the what? You're the head of gold. And then it's going to go to the Medo-Persians, and they're going to be the silver, and then it's going to go to the Grecian kingdom, and they're going to be the bronze, and then we're going to have the iron, and it's going to be mixed with what from Daniel chapter 2? Clay. But now here we see the same order. Now I don't know that there's any great significance in that, other than the fact that it's just kind of an interesting point to ponder. But then they also praise the gods of wood and stone. Now, this is all in the process of the Babylonian people, and they're praising the gods of all of these things. So they had a god that they would praise that was the supposed god of what? Gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. So they had this multitude of gods that they worshiped. And so suddenly now in this setting, as they're now praising these idols, their gods, now suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace, and the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Now folks, just envision this. Some of you, like I said, I'll mention this, you won't remember this at all, but wasn't there a cousin It? On what? And what was he? Huh? Just a hand. I wonder if the producers and directors and all of that, the writers of Cousin It, took this from Daniel chapter 5. A hand doing what? Writing on the wall. And so he's writing, and so it's clearly, the whole point of it is, this hand came up where? Opposite of where they were gathered, and it's writing on the wall. And all they're seeing is the back of a hand. And so because that occurs now, the back of the hand that did the writing, then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began to knock together. Now envision that in your own mind now. His face grew pale. You ever seen the color leave somebody's face? What does that identify? Fear. And his thoughts alarmed him. What is this? But then his hip joints went slack. And his knees began to do what? So this was a vision that struck great fear in Belshazzar. Then the king called aloud to bring in the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple, and have a necklace of gold around his neck, and have authority as third ruler in the kingdom. So once again, much in line with what Nebuchadnezzar did. When Nebuchadnezzar had his dream, he said, whoever is able to interpret it, I'm going to bless you, and you're going to receive great things from me. Same promise is made here by Belshazzar. Then all the king's wise men came in, true to form, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Now notice, they couldn't read it, nor could they interpret it. Now what did we say was more than likely the historical background to this? Because in chapter 2, they couldn't interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dream. They wanted him, you tell us the dream, and then we'll go and we'll get you the interpretation. Because reportedly, what did these wise men have? A book that had all these supposed dreams, and so they would go and they would pour through those books, and they would find one that either fit or got close, and then out of that book, then they would take and give the interpretation. Well, they could not read the inscription, nor could they give the interpretation. Now, the king, Belshazzar, was greatly alarmed in verse number 9. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. So this was a vision, an event that left to man's own abilities. They had no answer for what they had just seen. All right, Dale? Right. Right. Yep. And, and even, we think about somebody's knees knocking together. Well, this comes from this. And as Dale alluded to, they would say the handwriting's on the wall. Well, what did the old timers mean by that? The handwriting's on the wall. Predicted. It's evident. It's certain. It's going to happen. The handwriting's on the wall. But also the handwriting's on the wall. What else is implied by that? Everybody ought to be able to what? Interpret it, read it, and understand it. So here, these men that were the supposed wise men found themselves unable. Now, folks, we've got to remember now how many years have passed here. When we look at it, and from the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and then, we left chapter 4, and what was Nebuchadnezzar doing in chapter 4? Yeah, he just came out of the pasture. Yeah, he was put out to pasture, and then a period of time passed, and he's now back in his position. And so then that closes, and the 4th chapter ends with Nebuchadnezzar at least giving honor and respect to the God of heaven. And then chapter 5 opens up, and we now have Belshazzar. And so some 25 to 30 years have elapsed, okay, from the time we closed chapter 4 till we opened chapter 5. And so we now have some that would probably have made up the group of men who tried to interpret the dream of Daniel 2. But in that 25 to 30 year period, we know that some would have probably passed away and they would have to be replaced. So we had old and we have new, and yet they're still unable to interpret what's taking place. Yeah, Ian?
Going to that point, I think it's important to give us a date back in Daniel chapter 1 of 606 BC, the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim. And then the Google tells us that Nebuchadnezzar was from 634 BC to 562 BC. So we can kind of see, we can kind of see or guess where Daniel's at in his life, because if he was a teenager in 606, and then you add 40 years to that, now he's 60 or
Yeah,
so.
that's true.
We can kind of age where, and that's just when Nebuchadnezzar dies.
Right.
Not including, was this immediately when Belshazzar took office, or had he been king for a little while? So.
Well, the dates for Belshazzar, I'll share them with you that I have. Belshazzar began to reign in 553. And so as Ian made mention, Nebuchadnezzar, 606 to 562, 63. Is that what you had, Ian?
Yeah, it's at 62.
Yeah.
I'm saying 63 also.
And so when we look at this, then, these dates are, what's happened with these dates is we get close to a ballpark, and that's about as close as we can get, because you take the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, then you have evil Merodach, his son, another Neriglissar, and then you have Labashai, Marduk, Nabonidus. So then Belshazzar comes on the scene, 553 to 539. So if you do 606 or 605 to 553, then we're going to be looking at a period of some 40 years, 45 years, something along that line. Just trying to roughly do some math without really focusing on it very much, which is kind of the way I did math all the way through school. Just kind of, let's just get close, that'll be good enough. So anyway, Belshazzar is now reigning and ruling, and so if Ian is correct, and if Daniel went in, and some would predict him anywhere between 15 and 17 years of age, so if 40 to 45 years have passed, then he's now 60-ish, and then he's going to continue. And we would assume that the three friends that we read about in chapter 3 are going to be similar in age. And so now we have this event unfold. Verses 10 and 12, 10 through 12, the queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles, and the queen spoke and said, "O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale." So do not let this bother you, and don't continue to be upset and alarmed by it. But who's the queen? Whoever the queen is, by what verse 11 tells us, because she goes to the king, Belshazzar, and she tells him in essence, calm down. Verse 11, there is a man. So who did she have knowledge of? Daniel. Now, speculation as to who this queen might be. Could it have been Belshazzar's queen, his wife? Possibly. But once again, we're looking at 40 some odd years. And so, apparently as Belshazzar is doing all of this and all of this is happening, he's unaware of who Daniel is. But she says there is a man. There is speculation. Could this have been Nebuchadnezzar's wife? And they're referring back to her as the queen in just an accommodative or respectful role. Could it have been? The point is, we don't know who the queen is exactly. We could put a lot of different thoughts out there, but the one thing we do know is this. She knew of Daniel's reputation. And she says, there is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father, illumination, insight, and wisdom. Now, as I noted earlier, reading through that list of kings, there were several kings, and so Belshazzar is not, that's not the father-son relationship like myself and Ian. But is it not the case that oftentimes you'll see where a man is referred to as the father of someone, and they will be generations apart? And so it's in an accommodative sense where they are being referred to as the father, when in reality they may be a grandfather, great-grandfather, whatever the case might be. They refer to them in that manner. And I believe that's the case here. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father. Well, once again, we're looking at 40 years, roughly. So in the days of your father, that'd be Nebuchadnezzar, illumination, insight, and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. Now this was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge, and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. So the queen comes in, and she gives the king, Belshazzar, she gives him great advice. You need to call for Daniel. Your men have been unable to interpret this, and you need to call in Daniel. Now, once again, this 12th verse and all the things that it describes that Daniel was able to do. Was Daniel able to do this all on his own? No. And so this is, whether intended or not, this is a compliment to whom? The God of heaven. So, now Daniel is going to interpret the handwriting on the wall. And this is going to be in verses 13 through 16, where the king gives charge, really to call Daniel, summon him. Where Daniel was, we don't know. Once again, when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego went into the fiery furnace, Daniel wasn't there. We assume he was doing what? Okay? He was tending to king's business. Tending to, much like Joseph when he went to Egypt and he got elevated to that position. Now, Joseph had a lot of duties that came with that. And so, same things here with Daniel. So Daniel was brought in before the king. So wherever he was, they went and got him and they brought him back. And the king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah. Now, I have heard about you, that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, and extraordinary wisdom have been found in you. Just now, the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me, that they might read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you. So what does this imply here? I personally have heard about you. Okay? He was known. I've heard about you. But apparently Belshazzar did not have any what? Personal knowledge of what Daniel was able to do. He might not have even known Daniel. They may have never met. If Daniel was tending to king's business, and Ben brought it up the other day, talking in class, there were 127 precincts that the Babylonians ruled over. Their empire was vast. So if Daniel was over here tending to king's business, he might have been over here, and he and Belshazzar may have never actually interacted with one another. And so whatever the case, he does say, I've heard about you. But I personally have heard about you that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Yes, Dale? Right. Right. Well, the only time that we don't have a record of that, and by representative you would mean a prophet, priest, someone in that category. The only time we don't have a record of that would be that period of time between the testaments. Those hundreds of years where there was no inspired writing. And this is something we got to remember. And let's just do this, because I'm getting some looks from some like, what are you talking about? All right. Folks, when does the Old Testament close? Okay, 400 BC. Now, there are 400 years of biblical silence. Anybody know what I mean by biblical silence? Do what, Justin? No inspired writings. This is then where we would go historically. Now, that doesn't mean things just stopped. But God's inspired men were no longer writing. So then you would have books that would come into play, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and a lot of other volumes that were written. Well, they've been preserved for us. Okay? And they're recounting history and stuff, but it's not what kind of history? Not inspired history. That doesn't mean it's not recorded accurately. Is history still being recorded today? But the blank one. I don't know. That's an interesting thought, that 400 years in Egypt, 400 years of biblical silence. I don't know that there'd be a... Well, it could be, yeah. Here's the Old Testament, and there's a blank page in between, and that blank page represents 400 years of Bible silence as far as God recording things. Now, was God still working? Was the world still being prepared and made ready for the coming of Jesus? Yes. So then this opens up. So, as we go back to this understanding of God always having a representative, a priest, a prophet, so forth. The only time that was not, we would not have a record of that is in that 400 years of biblical silence. But then when we open up our New Testament and we start reading, it's not very long until we now realize that, okay, things have been going and they have been progressing. And so now, coming out of the Babylonian captivity, now the Jews have synagogues that they meet in. They now have sects. And by sects, I'm talking about different groups of people that were not there before. We have the Pharisees. We have the Sadducees. We have the Essenes. You're even going to have the Herodians, as these are all different groups. Now, when we open up the New Testament, now, who's the two most prominent ones? Pharisees and Sadducees. But you also have the Essenes, and you can check, and it's during that 400 years of biblical silence that they were established and came to power, and so to speak. And so you have these different things that unfolded. Well, all of this was preparatory to one event, the coming of Jesus. And when it was time for Jesus to come and to make his arrival, then what did God's men do? They started writing again by what? Inspiration. Therefore, the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. That's how Matthew 1 opens. And so then, when you look at that, then you're going to see then God is working things. And there's a whole lot of things in history. And I don't know, maybe one of these years we'll take on that task of looking at that, because there are a host of things in history, people rising, people falling, things happening. And that's a very interesting study, those 400 years, because it's not that history wasn't recorded, but it was not biblical history. Yes, Justin? Oh, that's exactly right. By the time Jesus arrives, then the high priest, that office had become a political thing, because they were trying to, do all they could to get the Romans out of Judea, and they were trying to court the favor of this country and so forth. So maybe at some point in time in the future we'll kind of look at some of that 400 years of history, because as Dale alluded to, what it does is it just increases our faith in the fact that the God of heaven never quit working, but there's a substantial amount of time, at least in our thinking, where the Bible was silent on things, but things were still being worked out, being recorded, so that we can look back at them and substantiate things historically. All right, Eric, and then Ben.
We look at it from our point of view as years, but, 2 Peter 3:8 talks about, he said, don't let this, when talking about coming to the Lord, he said, don't let this notice escape you that, 1,000 years is one day to the Lord.
Yeah.
And one day could be 1,000 years to the Lord.
Yep.
That 400 years is like nothing.
There's a drop in the bucket. I mean, yeah. And that's what I was thinking as I made that statement. We look at 400 years, and that seems like forever. But for God, that wasn't anything. I mean, it wasn't anything at all. I mean, as far as period of time, I mean, when you're eternal, always have been, always will be, then what does 400 years mean? Well, as Brother Eric alluded to, Peter tries to get us to understand that. 1,000 years with God is as what? One day, and one day is as what? 1,000 years. So the whole point is, we're worried about 400 years, and God is looking way beyond that 400-year period. All right, Ben? Yeah.
It kind of gets answered in chapter 6 of Daniel, because it said it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princesses. So it's pretty close call right there.
Yeah. Yep. And so as we continue to look through this chapter, I personally have heard about you, and that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you are able to read the inscription, make its interpretation known, then I'm going to give you all of these gifts. Now, verse 17, then Daniel answered and said before the king, keep your gifts for yourself, or give your rewards to someone else. However, I will read the inscription and of the king and make the interpretation known to him. O king, the Most High God granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language feared and trembled before him. So I would say that Nebuchadnezzar might have been one of those unsung, unheralded rulers of the world that we generally don't give much thought to. But notice, this Daniel, by inspiration, if you were going to sum up what he says about Nebuchadnezzar in this 19th verse, in the first part of it, what would it be? Yeah, well, yeah, rightly so. But Daniel is saying Nebuchadnezzar was what? He was a mighty world ruler. That's why he's described as what? The head of gold. Yes, and at least he gave respect to him. Whether he, became a wholehearted believer, that's questionable, but he recognized there's a God in heaven. And Nebuchadnezzar was that head of gold. And so if we look at the metals, we have gold, silver, bronze, iron. Well, they're diminishing in what? Value. Same thing's going to be happening with these world kingdoms. We think of Alexander the Great as one of the greatest world rulers that ever lived. Well, when you compare him to Nebuchadnezzar and what the Bible has to say, well, there might have been a marked difference between the abilities of Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great. Chase? Right.
And he's saying, you have done the same. Your father was proud and lost his glory, and now...
You're prideful and you're going to lose your glory. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and Nebuchadnezzar had the opportunity to change. And so notice, because in this 19th verse it says, now, whomever he wished, he killed. I mean, whoever he wished, he spared. He kept them alive, and whoever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. So Nebuchadnezzar did all of these things as he wanted to do them. All right, Ian?
Well, I was just thinking about, Bill's point about Daniel maybe being fearful to say all this before Belshazzar, but, he also knows that, they tried to burn his 3 friends in the fire, and it didn't work.
Right.
He knows that God's going to take care of him, or he knows
Either way, God's going to take care of him.
take care of him.
Yeah.
So he kind of gets to that point where he's kind of like, I get to say what I want because what's this king going to do to me, really?
Right.
And when we look and see what we studied in the New Testament and in class and your class and all, what would we be today if we didn't have this people?
Yeah.
If we didn't have Daniel, if we didn't have, all that is written in the Old Testament.
Right. Well, and as Romans 15:4 clearly says, these things are written for our learning. And folks, I think God knows us. I like to read about people. I like to read the events about people. And so God gives us these people because did Daniel really live? What about Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar? These are people who really lived, and they lived in that part of the world where things took place. And so we're going to stop right here because our bell's about to ring. So we'll pick up next Sunday, Lord willing. We'll be in verse 20, and we'll go on through chapter 5. Then we'll enter chapter 6, hopefully, and by then we'll see where we've now come to another ruling and reigning kingdom, and that's going to be Darius the Mede. And so we'll entertain those thoughts next week. I thank you all for your comments, and look forward to our next hour where we will be worshiping our God. So thank you so much, and we'll be dismissed.